Once upon a time, in a quiet and cozy town, there lived a boy named Tim. He was an ordinary 10-year-old boy with curly hair and bright eyes. Tim lived with his parents in a big house on the outskirts of town. However, fate decided to play a cruel joke on him. One beautiful summer day when Tim's parents went on a long trip, leaving him alone in the house. The boy was a little excited, but also happy, as it was his first opportunity to be alone. The first few days went by peacefully and carefree. Tim enjoyed his freedom, spending time with exciting games and exploring interesting books. He felt independent and grown up. However, as time went on, the house started to feel more empty and quiet. The sounds that usually fill its walls, the noise of the TV, parents' laughter, and the smells of homemade food all disappeared. Tim began to feel emptiness. One day, when there was a heavy rainstorm outside, Tim heard a strange sound. It was a knocking sound coming from behind the old door in the basement. The boy decided to go and check what was happening there. He slowly descended the creaky stairs and opened the door. Before him was a dark and dusty basement filled with old boxes and forgotten items. Tim listened carefully and heard the knocking again. He bravely walked deeper into the basement and discovered an old room he had never seen before. In the center of the room stood an antique table, on which lay a dusty book. Tim approached the table and opened the book. The book turned out to be an ancient spell book. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and mysterious illustrations. Tim was intrigued and began to read the spells out loud. Suddenly, something unusual started happening in the room. The air filled with magical light, and a strange creature appeared from under the floor. It was a little house spirit named Gregory, who told Tim that he had been trapped in this room for many years. Tim and Gregory became best friends. Gregory told the boy about his adventures and magical secrets. They spent their days studying books and practicing spells. However, Tim still felt a void in his heart. He realized that true happiness was being with loved ones. He missed his parents and wished for them to come back home. Tim and Gregory decided to use their magical abilities to bring back his parents. They spent the whole night preparing for the spell. The day came when Tim and Gregory were ready. They stood in the center of the room, holding hands, and recited the spell with full concentration. A magical glow surrounded them, and the air filled with energy. In the next moment, Tim's parents stood before him. They were surprised and happy to see their son. The boy hugged them tightly and told them about his adventures with Gregory. Since then, Tim no longer felt lonely. He realized that a home is not just walls and furniture, but a place where love and family live. And although he continued to meet Gregory and study magic, his true happiness was being with his parents. Second, scary story in the quiet and cozy bedroom of a little girl named Emily. Strange things were happening. Every night when she went to bed, she felt an unclear presence under her bed. At first, it was just a slight movement, but over time it became more noticeable and frightening. One day, when Emily's parents put her to bed and left the room, she heard a strange rustling sound coming from under the bed. Her heart started pounding and fear engulfed her whole body. She could no longer ignore this presence and decided to bravely look under the bed. With a sigh and trembling hands, Emily leaned over and peered under the bed. What she saw made her scream in horror. There in the dark shadow was a huge and repulsive monster. Its eyes glowed with malice, and its fangs looked sharp and dangerous. The monster began crawling out from under the bed, getting closer to Emily. She tried to crawl back, but her legs refused to obey. The monster stood up on two legs and slowly approached the girl, smiling with a malicious grin. Emily closed her eyes and tried to focus. She remembered tales of brave knights and fearless princesses who defeated monsters. Suddenly, something new ignited in her heart, determination and strength. She opened her eyes and met the monster's gaze. Boldly raising her head, she said, "You can't harm me. I'm not afraid of you." Her words pierced through the air and filled the room with power. The monster slowed down its movements and looked at the girl with surprise. Something resembling regret flickered in its eyes. It realized that it couldn't harm this small and brave girl. The monster slowly retreated and returned under the bed. Emily breathed a sigh of relief and realized that she had conquered her fear. She was no longer afraid of the monster under the bed because she found the strength to confront it within herself. Since then, every night before bed, Emily would say to the monster under the bed, "I know you're there, but I'm not afraid of you. It can't harm me. It can't harm me." And the monster stayed there in its hiding place, no longer posing a threat to the girl. The story of the monster under Emily's bed became a legend in their family. They would tell it to friends and acquaintances to show that fear can be overcome and strength can be found within oneself. Emily grew up to be a brave and determined young woman, ready to face any challenges that life would bring her. Third scary story. One day, strange things began to happen in a quiet and comfortable house. Residents of the house noticed that things moved by themselves, heard footsteps along the corridor in complete silence, and saw shadows that disappeared instantly. But the worst thing happened one dark night. The family, consisting of father, mother, and 2 children, slept peacefully in their rooms. Suddenly, a piercing scream broke the silence of the night. Everyone woke up and jumped out of their beds, frightened and confused. When they ran out into the corridor, it became clear to them that the scream was coming from the basement. The family descended the stairs, feeling a cold shiver on their skin. The cellar door was ajar, and a strange whisper came from it. They resolutely opened the door and saw an incredible sight. Before them stood the pale and distorted ghost of a woman. Her eyes were full of anger and despair, and her hair flowed around her as if alive. The eerie ghost began to whisper incomprehensible words that penetrated the deepest consciousness of the family. They felt that the ghost wanted to tell them something, but they could not understand his message. Suddenly, the ghost began to move towards the family, despite the fact that they were stepping back. They tried to close the basement door, but it closed on its own with a loud bang. The family was trapped with a ghost. The creepy ghost began to get closer and closer. They heard his breath and felt his cold touch. Desperately, they tried to get out of the basement, but all their efforts were in vain. Suddenly, everything stopped. The ghost disappeared and the basement door opened. The family ran outside, frightened and shocked by what had happened. They immediately left the house and never returned there. No one knows what caused the ghost to appear in this house and haunt its inhabitants. But one thing remains forever in the memory of the family: a terrible story about a ghost in their house, which left them with unforgettable horror and anxiety for life.